Hello, welcome to everybody who's joining the room. I'm very happy to have you here today. And we're just going to give a couple of minutes. We'll start about 2 minutes past, just to let people get in and join. If you want to share in the chat where you're joining us from, it's really nice to see all the different corners of the world where people are tuning in from. Welcome Claire in Berlin, and Carolyn in Birmingham, Jacqueline from Aotearoa, Cassandra, welcome from North London and very close to where I am. Stafford in the UK. Welcome Jessica in London. Cornwall, hi Helen. Hi Ed, also in London. I'm glad you could join us. Hi Laura in Bristol. So just mute yourselves if you're joining so we haven't got any background noise. Yeah. So welcome to Margaret in Preston. I know Margaret's in Preston because it's my mum. Welcome to Jenny in Norfolk, Jill in Derbyshire, Adam in London. Oh, it's really nice to feel into where everybody is. So welcome to everybody. My name's Katie and I'm the director at Flourishing Diversity. And yeah, on behalf of the Flourishing Diversity team, I want to thank you all for joining this second We as Nature event. And we're hosting this one as part of the Living Nature series, which is in collaboration with Invisible Dust, and we'll be sharing links to that in the chat. The intention for this particular event, which is our more community feel event, our community space, is to create a joyful space in which we can explore a potentially lifelong inquiry as to how we as individuals and communities can continue to deepen our alignment with each other, with our fellow species, with the land and the waters, and particularly for those of us that weren't born and raised in cultures where this was the norm. And so the second half is also an opportunity for us to connect and to spark with like-minded and like-hearted people who also care deeply about the earth. And really just in our busy days, generally most of us are very busy and very action oriented. We really wanted to create a space where we could just pause and be in a little more of a receptive space, which allows us more for just inspiration and musings and contemplating without having to have some striving for a fixed goal or an outcome. So each month we invite a different storyteller who shares part of their personal experience in their life of being in connection and feeling that connection with the rest of nature and the world. And today we are really thrilled and honoured to welcome Judy Ling Wong, who I'm going to introduce to you more in a second. So in terms of how this will run, I will introduce Judy, our storyteller, first. And then I'm just going to give us 2 minutes, little brief moment to drop into a bit more of a listening receptive space. And then I will pass directly to Judy, who's going to share her story with us for 20 minutes. And after that 20 minutes, if you would like to stay and to connect with other people in this event, we'll put you in small breakout rooms. And that's a chance to reflect upon and discuss what we've just heard. and really to try and recreate in a virtual way those opportunities that we get in physical spaces where we've shared an event together and we might just strike up a conversation organically with somebody in the hallway. And yeah, we're hoping to recreate that in a virtual way, and it's been working really beautifully, actually. So without further ado, it's my real pleasure to introduce Judy Ling Wong, and it seems very ridiculous to describe her in a few sentences, because she's just, I believe she has touched the hearts of so many people in her lifetime, including mine. And so we're really happy to have her here, but in the few words bio kind of way that we do in these events. Judy is a painter, a poet, and an environmentalist, best known for her role as the honorary president of the Black Environmental Network. For 27 years, she's been the UK director of the Black Environmental Network and has an international reputation for pioneering and creating the field of multicultural participation in the built and natural environment. Judy is a major voice on policy and practice towards social inclusion, and she is recognized as a visionary advocate for diversity and equality. So I'm going to invite everybody to get very comfortable wherever you are. Make yourselves as physically comfortable as you can. Grab a cushion, take a seat back, and if it feels comfortable, you might want to just close your eyes for 1 minute. I'm just going to invite you to tune in to the rhythm of your breath. And just being aware of the breath. In this moment. And then just noticing what you can hear, what sounds you're able to hear where you are. And noticing whether those sounds, some of the sounds are far away. And which sounds are close by. And then just having a sense of the landscape that's around you, wherever you are. Whether you are in a rural place or in a built up place or somewhere in between. And noticing what connection you have to where you are right now. If this is somewhere that you have spent a lot of time, whether it's a house that you've grown up in or raised a family in, or perhaps a space that you're passing through. And really bringing that space into this virtual community space with us and all the other creatures that share that space with you. And so without further ado, Judy, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. All of you have just been beautifully taken into yourself, and I'm about to take you away from yourself into my world. Because the story I tell comes from a very early experience when I had not left Hong Kong, a small child growing up in Hong Kong. I'm about to turn 72, so you need to take yourself back in time, away from all those pictures of glitzy Hong Kong as an international center, because it wasn't there. The place I grew up in was a place in which, at that time, people were pouring across the border into Hong Kong because they knew it was British, running away from the chaos of Mao's China. Hong Kong used to be an island that was barren with about 200 fishermen. But it was lost to Britain because of the Opium Wars. The Opium Wars were about British assertion that it's thoroughly legitimate to see opium as a commodity. So why shouldn't they sell it to the Chinese? They grew opium in India and flooded China with opium, starting to undermine society with this drug. And the Chinese wanted it to stop. So at one point, the Chinese burned a huge load of opium. And that was the trigger for the Opium Wars. If we look back at the history of Britain, the use of force was a major thing in dominating the world, where there was trade or colonialism. And they claimed the right to continue to trade in opium by winning the Opium War. As part of that, Hong Kong was ceded to Britain. Why did they want this funny little barren island? It's because it has one of the most deep and remarkable sheltered harbors in the world when there were no planes. It was all about ocean liners and big ships and so on for many, many years. And they used the port of Hong Kong to continue to import opium into China. So with the changes, with Mao's chaos and so on, people used to think, oh, why would you go to such a place? There's nothing there. But with the chaos, it was somewhere to run, and there was no border. Because before that chaos, people sort of didn't really want to go to Hong Kong, so why do you even need to build a border? But with the people pouring across the borders, Hong Kong then had the first border in 1949, the year I was born, with what is so-called the bamboo curtain. And of course, of the people pouring into Hong Kong, they brought the culture with them, an ancient culture. It was mystical. I grew up in a world in which everything was alive. Everything. Not what you just call living things, meaning that it grows. A rock was also alive. It had its own life. A rock might be part of a mountain. It might disintegrate and become part of soil. It has a life. It can live and die as a rock and become something else and is still alive. So the story that I tell you has a context within which my experience was allowed. Children have such intense experiences. Many would have had experiences like mine, but in your scientific culture, with its bleakness of boundaries, would it be allowed? Would a mystical and aesthetic experience be rubbished, and the young child would not retain that intensity and just let it go, forgotten, as they grow into adulthood. So there I was, this small child. And the circumstances was that I was a very ill child. My parents had run from China, struggled with having food to feed the children. No contraception. The woman kept having children until the children began to die. Because after all, children take their flesh and bone from the mother, and they get weaker and weaker. The child born before me died. So did the child born after me. She also died. And when I survived as a very frail child, they thought I was the last child and treasured me because of that privilege of being the last. But it was not true that I was the last. So being so ill in my early years, and the adults struggling to survive, very often there was nobody in the house when I was ill in my bed. I was left with some food. That was it. I was all alone, rattling around in this house with a garden. And sometimes I would go into the garden. Hong Kong is a subtropical country. It can get very hot. It can have blazing sunshine. It has tropical storms every day at the same time at noon, followed by brilliant sunshine. In summer, a steamy place. So when I went into the garden, against the back of the garden was a little cliff, not very high, about 30 feet, because the house was built cutting into the side of a hill. And against this little piece of cliffside, I called it a cliffside because as a small child, it was so high to me, was a row of trees that we call flame of the forest. Why were they called flame of the forest? Because the flowers come before the leaves, bright, fiery orange red. And if you had a forest of them, they would look like the forest is on fire. And this row of trees was against this little cliffside, running into it, arching and running into the cliffside. It created a tunnel. It was dark under these trees against the cliffside. And it dripped with water, moist darkness. And when you go into it, the cliffside was covered, completely covered in the most delicate ferns, soft, dark and green in the darkness. And when you look at the sun from this darkness through those trees, especially when the flowers came out, you saw a dazzling sunshine in between the glowing flowers, resplendent with the sunlight in orange and red. And I repeatedly went alone into this space. And there, one day, as I usually do when I'm in the tunnel, I usually run my hands across the ferns. They were so soft. It was like the fur of a cool, moist animal. And as I did that, immersed in the moist darkness, with the filtered, dazzling light between the red, I felt myself dissolve into the ferns. I was no more. I was inside the ferns. I, the waving, gentle ferns in the darkness. How long did I stay like that? Maybe not very long. Long enough, however, to feel it was an eternity in the cosmos of moist, living, waving, moving ferns. This is the experience that marked my relationship with nature. I was at one, not just notionally, but actually. And my culture allows it. I can do this in this mystical, ancient world where everything is alive and interpenetrable. I can be this. This experience is labeled real. So I carried this experience, undamaged by cultures that might deny its reality. And I did not speak of it to others in my culture. It was mine alone, carried intact into my life. As I grew, I wandered because I was displaced from Hong Kong to Australia, Australia to Europe, living in West Berlin, and then coming to London. Sometimes people read my travels and think it is very glamorous without realizing that was because I had no right to stay anywhere until I finally escaped back into that British colonial identity and came to my so-called mother country in the UK. To my surprise, when I came to London, I liked it. And I stayed. And multicultural London has been my home since 1974. So everything is marked by this experience. I came as a poet and artist, but I was lonely with the Western mode of artist, individual and original. I was trained as a Chinese traditional artist and declared a professional when I was 12. And it was a communal framework of artistry. Artists would gather, for example, regularly in cafes, and a huge piece of rice paper would be put on the wall, and we painted communal compositions as an expression of our continuity with each other. So I was lonely, and I began to do something in which I could connect with the community. So part of my work became as a community artist. And that was when the die was cast for my becoming an environmentalist. I connected with ethnic minorities in that communal work, and I identified with them because we have common journeys of displacement and suffering. And when the time came, when I ran into that group that began questioning the whiteness of the environmental sector, we were to become the steering group and found the Black Environment Network. When I was a community artist, we always asked the community what they wanted to do as a project. Surprisingly or not, they kept saying the environment as a theme. So themes were coming together. And as I grew in age into my 30s and was finding my social commitment, I decided to abandon the arts altogether. I wanted huge change. The arts were not fast enough for me. And yet I was carried by creativity. My friends were shocked. They said, "You're building up your artistic career. How can you suddenly abandon it and be environmental?" I never had a problem. I always recognized that to just hinge artistic existence on the creation of sellable artistic products was limited. Everything is creative. I go by what Joseph Beuys, the artist, says. Everyone is an artist. Creativity is in all of us. The artist might be at the pinnacle of creativity, but we can use creativity through process to connect and awaken everyone's creativity and change the world. And throughout all of this intensity of identification with nature, the intense impulse to protect what I love and what I am continues to be a major underpinning essence of all that I do. Thank you for listening.
Judy, thank you. I'm just going to leave a little pause, actually. Speaking for myself, that was a real journey you just took us on. A very visceral, very intimate story that you shared. And thank you so much, Judy, for bringing that. Really. And so to move to the second part of this event, if those of us that would like to leave here that just wanted to listen to the story, thank you so much for joining. And we hope that you will join us next time. Next month, we have on the 27th of November, Method Gundidza from Zimbabwe. He's the director of the Earth Law Foundation. So that's our storyteller next month.